Hi everybody, welcome to Esio Trot part 3 in our special Jackanory story all about an amazing size changing tortoise, or so Mrs. Silver thinks. Now yesterday we left the story where Mr. Hoppy had just put into place his special plan to attract the attentions of Mrs. Silver. Remember, he went round all the pet shops in the town buying tortoises of different sizes, but they had to look something like Alfie, Mrs. Silver's own tortoise. And you may remember that all the tortoises were spread all over Mr. Hoppy's floor, and he was having to step really carefully in between the tortoises as he mapped out his plan. So let's pick it up from there with Mr. Hoppy moving into plan stage 2. Here we go. Now, before he retired, Mr. Hoppy had been a mechanic in a bus garage, and now he went back to his old place of work and asked his mates if he might use their old workbench for an hour or two. What he had to do now was to make something that could reach down from his own balcony down to Mrs. Silver's balcony and to pick up the tortoise. It wasn't difficult for somebody who'd been a bus mechanic like Mr. Hoppy, and he used the equipment in the bus mechanic's garage to help him. First he made 2 metal claws or fingers, and these attached to the end of a long blue metal tube. He ran 2 stiff wires down inside the tube and connected them to the metal claws in such a way that when you pulled the wire, the claws closed, and when you released the wire, the claws opened again. Effectively, it meant it could pick up a tortoise from a distance. And these wires were all joined by a clever little handle at the top. It was all very simple. Mr. Hoppy was ready to begin. I suppose, guys, you could call it a socially distanced tortoise picker-upper. That's a perfect joke for the day, isn't it? Now, Mrs. Silver had a part-time job. She worked from noon, 12 o'clock, until 5 o'clock every weekday afternoon in a shop that sold newspapers and sweets and milk and things like that, and made things a lot easier for Mr. Hoppy to carry out his secret plan. So on that first exciting afternoon, after he made sure that Mrs. Silver had gone to work, Mr. Hoppy went out into his balcony, armed with the long metal pole. He called this his tortoise catcher. What a title, tortoise catcher. He leaned over with the tortoise catcher to see where Alfie was, and he put it down towards Mrs. Silver's balcony below. Alfie was there, basking in the pale sunlight. "Hello there, Alfie," Mr. Hoppy said. "You're about to go for a little ride." Ha 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 ha. He wriggled the tortoise catcher till it was right above Alfie. He pushed the hand lever so that the claws opened wide, and then lowered the 2 claws gently over Alfie's shell. He pulled the lever. The claws closed quite tightly over the shell like 2 fingers on a hand. He pulled Alfie up to his own balcony. It was very easy. Mr. Hoppy weighed Alfie on his kitchen scales just to make sure that Mrs. Silver's figure of 13 ounces was correct. It was correct. Now, holding Alfie in one hand, he picked his way carefully through the huge collection of tortoises that he bought to find one, first of all, that had the same colour shell as Alfie, and secondly, weighed 2 ounces more than Alfie. 2 ounces, you see, guys, is not much. It's less than a smallish hen's egg weighs, but you see, the important thing in Mr. Hoppy's plan was to make sure the new tortoise was bigger than Alfie, but just a tiny bit bigger. The difference had to be so small that Mrs. Silver wouldn't notice straight away. From his vast collection, it was not difficult for Mr. Hoppy to find just the tortoise he wanted. He wanted one that weighed about 15 ounces exactly on the kitchen scales, no more and no less. When he got it, he put it on the kitchen table next to Alfie. And even then he could hardly tell which one was bigger than the other and which one was actually Alfie and which one was the other tortoise. Mr. Hoppy took tortoise number 2, as he called it, out onto the balcony, gripped it to the claws of the tortoise catcher and lowered it back down onto Mrs. Silver's balcony, right beside a nice piece of lettuce. Tortoise number 2 had never eaten tender, juicy lettuce leaves before. It had only had thick old cabbage leaves. It loved the lettuce. It started chomping it straight away with great gusto. There followed a rather nervous 2 hours wait for Mrs. Silver to come back from work. Would she see any difference? Would she notice it wasn't Alfie? It was going to be a tense moment for Mr. Hoppy. Out onto her balcony swept Mrs. Silver as she came home. "Oh, Alfie, my darling! Mummy's back! Have you missed me, my darling?" Mr. Hoppy peered over the railings. He was well hidden between 2 plants. He didn't want to be seen. He even held his breath. The new tortoise was still chomping away at the lettuce. Didn't have a care in the world. "Oh, my Alfie, you do seem a little hungry today, don't you? You naughty little tortoise," Mrs. Silver was saying. "It must be Mr. Hoppy's magic rhyme that did it. I've been whispering it to you, haven't I, you cheeky, weaky, growingy, little tortoise?" Now, Mr. Hoppy watched as Mrs. Silver picked the tortoise up and stroked the back of his shell. And then she fished Mr. Hoppy's piece of paper out of her pocket, and holding the tortoise very close to her face, she whispered, reading the rhyme from the paper, thinking that was doing the magic trick. Here it is again. Esio, Trot, teg regib, emok no, Esio, Trot. Walk poo, fop poo, toos poo, nibs poo, walk poo, lose poo. Egg frog, elzog, fot, plug, tup no taff, Esio, Trot, tup no taff. Teg no, elborg, doof. Crazy rhyme, but she believes in it, guys. Mr. Hoppy popped his head out of the foliage and called out, "Good evening, Mrs. Silver. How is Alfie doing tonight?" "He's doing wonderful. He's eating lettuce for England." And they all laughed. Mrs. Silver looked up and she beamed towards him. "And you know, he's developing this huge appetite. It's wonderful to see. I've never seen him eat like this before. It's definitely your magic words and your magic backwards rhyme, Mr. Hoppy. This is amazing. I can't wait to see what he's like in just a few days' time." And neither can you. I know you're excited out there listening to this story. What will happen next? Well, if you stay tuned, tortoise lovers, tomorrow we will see if the next part of the plan pays off for Mr. Hoppy. Will Mrs. Silver remain as excited and happy? Will Alfie or Alfie's others grow? Will Mr. Hoppy succeed? We will find out tomorrow in part 4 of Jackanory, Esio, Trot. See you then. Take care.